This time I'm going to invite our guest preacher up. Reverend Dr. Mark Davies is the Wimberley Professor of Social and Ecological Ethics at Wimber, Oklahoma City. And he has been here this weekend, was a speaker at the Drawdown conference yesterday, and has participated in the weekend events that have taken place here around some of these sustainability concerns. And we're really blessed to have him here as a guest preacher this morning. He'll also be talking during the adult forum. And I just wanted to mention a couple of other things about him. There's a little bio in the bulletin, which you can read. But the one thing that I found out that's especially funny and is a connection to our congregation is that Mark Davies was Nicole Clowney's high school teacher. And Nicole's a member at Good Shepherd and also now a new Arkansas congresswoman. And so I thought that was kind of a fun connection. So anyway, we're really glad that you're here, and welcome.
It is very good to be with you, and I'll say that I've been in probably 150 churches where I've spoken, and only 2 of those churches have had solar panels on the roof. So I have to commend you for that, especially given that the topic I'm speaking on today is the resurrection of creation, and we'll be exploring some themes of sustainability together. During the first year of my life, Martin Luther King Jr. published an essay that was titled "The World House." The World House. And in that essay, he called on all of us to work together to eradicate the evils of racism, poverty, and war. And in that essay, he wrote these words: "We have inherited a large house, a great world house, in which we have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace." He wrote that in 1967. King recognized that although we might be from many different religions and cultural backgrounds, that we share this one planet, this one world house, of which we are all a part. He also recognized that unlike other kinds of houses, if we destroy our one world house, we cannot simply move to another house or build a new one. This one world house is the only one we have. When it comes to caring for the household of our planet, there are no do-overs. We have to get it right the first time, because it is the only time that we have. And we share the awesome responsibility of making sure that the world house that we have inherited will be enjoyed by generations to come. Generations of humans and non-humans alike. Persons of all faiths and persons who may have no particular faith. If we do not accept this responsibility, our children and their children might have some very difficult questions for us. Like, what were you thinking? Did you not care enough about us to give us a world that is filled with peace and with justice and abundance of life? Were you so caught up in yourselves and your consumption that you failed to see what you were doing to our home? Were you so short-sighted and self-absorbed to think that whatever enjoyment you experienced from the excesses of your lifestyles warranted the destruction of our planet? I hope we won't have to hear questions like that from our children and their children, but this will only happen if our hopes are expressed in actions that move us in some new directions, actions that take care of this one planet, which is our only home. As much as I like Star Trek, and if you ask my family, you would know I really do like Star Trek, the chances that we will be traveling the cosmos and living on other planets are quite minimal. So I think it's a much better strategy for us to take care of the world house of our planet Earth. The Earth is too beautiful of a home for us to simply give up on it. But it's difficult to grasp how much damage we've done to this planet, how much damage we have done in our very short time as a species on this planet. Our planet has existed for 4.6 billion years or so, and we, as a species, have only existed for a few 100,000 years. And for most of that time, we had very little impact on the global environment. But recently, that has changed. In less than a blip of geologic time, so minute as to be almost no time at all, we have contributed to a mass extinction of species, and we are changing the very climate of the Earth itself. You might have heard of the Harvard insect professor, entomologist, Edward O. Wilson, who writes that conservative estimates are that the extinction rate caused by human activity is 100 to 1,000 times the normal background extinction rate. In other words, species are going extinct 100 to 1,000 times faster than they would without the presence of human activity in the world. At the current pace of extinction, about half of the species that existed at the beginning of the 21st century will no longer exist at the end of the 21st century. The whole creation truly groans in travail. If we do not change our behavior in our world house, our legacy will be the sixth great extinction on our planet, and the only one brought about by the activities of a single species. It is the greatest moral imperative of our time that we turn away from our ways of living that bring more death than more life. This moral imperative calls us to think thousands and even millions of years into the future, and to think about all species of life rather than just thinking about our own generation of human persons. This moral imperative calls on all persons from all religions and all cultures to work together for the renewal of the planet. And as King recognized in his World House essay, we must somehow learn to live with each other in peace. But living in peace with each other as human beings is not enough. We must also find ways to live in peace with the planet itself. We may be from many religions, some may be from no religion, but we are all members of one planet. We are all members of one world house. 51 years ago, Martin Luther King recognized that we need a global, interfaith, ecumenical movement to care for this one world house by creating true peace, overcoming racism, and eradicating poverty. And today, we must add to this work the work of sustaining our planet for ourselves, for future generations, and for all life. Together, we are called to be the repairers of the climate breach. We are called to be repairers of the planet that we live in. We are called to be the restorers of a livable climate. One of our scripture passages this morning from Romans focused on hope for the whole creation. And we humans tend to be hopeful creatures. Those of us who follow Jesus also tend to be hopeful persons. And this season of Easter is one of those times in which we celebrate one of the greatest expressions of hope that we have, that new life and renewed life can break into the world even in what seem to be the darkest and least hopeful times. Easter is a time for us to hope that death does not have the last word, that somehow the way of love and justice will find a way to keep living on. It's difficult to live without hope. One of the great strengths of our species has been the ability to hold on to hope even in the midst of great challenges and to be able to persevere. Hope has led us through dark times of war and injustice and has given us strength to overcome numerous crises in the history of human civilization, even at times when all things seemed lost. In some ways, however, when it comes to problems and challenges like climate change, our ability to hope may have become a weakness for humanity. I'll try to make sense of that. Perhaps our hope that the future will be better than the past, which is a hope that we all want to share, perhaps that hope has led us into a kind of societal denial of the breadth and the depth of the challenge that we are facing with climate change. Perhaps an overly hopeful attitude of a better future has led us further down the slippery slope towards a more and more unavoidable climate chaos. Some of us have put our hope in God, that somehow God would not let us collectively ruin a livable climate for humanity. But surely we have seen enough evil and suffering play out in the world to realize that this is not how God works in the world. If this is how God worked in the world, we would not have had the Holocaust. We would not have had other genocides. We would not already be entering the sixth great extinction on our planet. Whatever God is, God does not seem to take matters into God's hands in the way that those who hope God will deliver us from global warming would like to think. You've heard people say it. We don't have to worry about climate change. God will take care of things. God will take care of us. That doesn't seem to be the way the world works and the way God works in the world. Some of us have put our hope in political action and activism, believing that when it became obvious, based on scientific evidence, that human activity was driving climate change, that we would all come together as one humanity to make the necessary social and economic changes to avoid the path towards climate chaos. In the early 1990s, it felt like things might have been moving in this positive direction. But those of us who hoped for sweeping global political action for climate justice were perhaps caught off guard by the breadth and the depth of global greed that hindered any meaningful action to address climate change before it's too late. Some of us have put our hope in technology. Technology can be a great thing. Some of us believe that when we as humans put our minds to it, we are always capable of coming up with technological solutions to overcome the challenges that we face. We hoped that alternative and clean energy would be developed and utilized quickly enough. And now, given that this scenario has not been playing out as we had hoped, we look to technologies that might help us geoengineer the climate. There are people talking about this. How can we geoengineer the climate of the planet? Such desperate geoengineering scenarios are becoming more and more acceptable as we have allowed the window to close on the possibility of shifting away from fossil fuels quickly enough to avoid climate chaos. Realistically, and I like to be a hopeful person, but realistically, when it comes to addressing climate change in ways that will avoid massive amounts of human suffering, economic and ecological collapse, And unfortunately, that suffering will include a tremendous amount of death. I think we're running low on hope. I think we're running low on hope. The great ice sheets and glacial systems of the world are disappearing. The permafrost in the Arctic is melting and releasing the potent greenhouse gas methane into the atmosphere. The Arctic sea ice is declining with larger areas of open ocean, leading to more absorption of heat and increase in global temperatures. Yet we seem more concerned about energy independence in the short run than we are concerned about a livable climate in the long run. As a person who has attempted to be hopeful for positive change in relation to our environment and climate change, it feels kind of horrific to admit that we have come to a point where we are so low on hope. But I am afraid it is a truth that we have to grapple with. But whether there is hope or no hope, let's not go down without a fight. Let's take the climate scientists at their good word based on strong empirical evidence and take seriously their estimates that we have about 11 years left to make significant, systemic, civilizational changes to avoid the very worst of climate change. That's what they're telling us. Let's move on something big and bold and visionary. Let's give ourselves every chance at survival that we can. Maybe we'll be fortunate that some unforeseen natural events might also assist us in arresting climate change and help us maintain a stable and livable climate. We do not fully know what the future holds, but we can be fairly certain that if we simply continue as we currently are, that it will be hopeless. But against all odds, we still need to work together to give ourselves the best possible chance for a livable climate and somehow find ways to do all that we can to treat one another with love, respect, and justice in the process. I'll end my sermon with you today with a parable that I hope we will take as a challenge for what churches might do and become for a more sustainable world and for a livable climate. So here begins the parable. I'll have to admit to you, I was thinking about my own church, the United Methodist Church, when I wrote this parable, but it's probably a parable that would make sense for any of the, quote, mainline denominations in the United States. There once was a mainline Christian denomination in the United States that was experiencing significant membership decline. Since its peak in membership in the 1950s and early 1960s, this denomination lost millions in total membership despite many intentional efforts to quell the decline. Untold numbers of church growth workshops and trainings and significant investment in consultants to right the course could not turn things around. Membership continued to plummet. The inability to reverse the decline was met with understandable concern as budgets and ministries were cut. As in all mainline denominations, there were many disagreements, including theological disagreements among the clergy and the laity, but nearly all were in agreement that something must be done to increase membership. Without more people in the pews, a once great denomination could become virtually non-existent within a couple of generations. Then, over a 10-year period, something of a miracle happened. After many years of study and strategizing about how to attract new members, the denomination actually finally started to turn around. Finding the right combination of engaging worship and preaching, community involvement, spiritual formation, and programs to help people deal with life's challenges, the denomination started to regain membership that it had been losing since the 1960s. Other denominations took notice and learned from the revitalized denomination. Over time, this denomination led a revival of mainline Protestant churches in the United States. Membership boomed. New buildings were built. Old buildings were renovated. Budgets were increasing. New agencies and ministries were created. Ministerial pension plans were in better shape than they had been for decades. In a relatively short period of time, mainline denominations were no longer looking back with nostalgia at the 1950s and 60s. A new day had dawned for these denominations in the United States. And the denomination that helped start the revival experienced growth and prosperity that it had never experienced before. Seminary attendance swelled as the church struggled to meet the demand for all the new ministers who were needed. Church growth experts lauded the 21st century as the century of renewal for Christianity in America. 2 generations later, the membership of this denomination and all other denominations that had benefited from this significant revival saw their membership decimated by the massive die-off of humans caused by the climate change-induced economic and ecological collapse that their churches had done almost nothing to address.